Let's move on to the Battle of the Borussias, which is the Saturday match of the week. I actually think this is a good choice from the Bundesliga decision makers in terms of picking, the match of the week. Gladbach are 10th, Dortmund are 5th. That sounds like a huge gap. The gap is 3 points, Stefan. That's how tight it is. There's a pack of a good, it goes pretty much from Gladbach all the way up to Dortmund that are all within 3 points from one another. And you can even say, like, if you could draw in RB Leipzig and Union and Werder Bremen, it's really 12 to 4 are only 5 points away from one another. It's extremely tight. And Gladbach have, at times really shown that they are a team that can go and play with the big boys. We've talked plenty about Tim Kleindienst and the way that he's performed this season. I think Dortmund will be very much wary about him and how, he can score goals and how he can really dissect defensive lines and do it in creative ways. I think that is something that Dortmund will really have to look out for. Dortmund, I think, with a decent performance in the Klassiker, right? They got the point, maybe a little bit unhappy that they didn't get all three after being up. Against Bayern Munich, I think Leverkusen demonstrated how you do get the 3 points across the line, or the win across the line, I should say, rather. But still, it wasn't the usual trashing at the Signal Iduna Park that they suffer from Bayern Munich, and they will take some confidence from that. A few question marks regarding the starting 11. Nemcha has played really well for Nuri Sahin over the last few matches, has made his way back into the German national team. Emre Can is back. The dilemma is, do you play Emre Can because it's your captain, or do you actually play the player who's good at his position and stick with Felix Nemcha? And that's a huge issue with this entire story entirely, isn't it? Because you made Emre Can captain, and that means that you pretty much have to play him, even though he's probably not good enough to be in that starting 11 anymore.
Yeah, this is now the second season under the second successive head coach that we're having this discussion about Emre Can, where he's pointed to this kind of ceremonial role, but there's obviously this kind of assumption that he should play. And, I think one of the things that Dortmund have done recently, which is definitely worth noting, is that, Edin Terzic has kind of pulled Nemcha back to this kind of number 6 position. He's playing Sabitzer in front of him, alongside, Julian Brandt or Pascal Gross. And it's working a lot better because they have a dynamism at the base of the midfield that they simply didn't have. Emre Can definitely has his qualities. He's got a great top speed. He's very physical. He wins headers. He makes tackles. He can certainly do a job. But the one thing that I think he's really struggled with over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a weird thing for him to struggle with since he's always been a centre midfielder, is that he always seems to really struggle with his blind spots. And by that I mean, when he's picking up the ball from defence and he has his back to the opponents, he seems to be very vulnerable to being intercepted or being harassed on the ball and making mistakes. He's quite easy to kind of force to make, I guess tennis they would say like an unforced mistake or something like that, where it's a problem that you've made yourself. And I think that's something that has caused Dortmund all sorts of grief, because it's not just in terms of him mispacing passes. It also he's a player in that position that's supposed to set the tempo for the team. We kind of thought that Pascal Gross was going to come in this summer and do that, but he's kind of been used as this kind of jack of all trades. He's sometimes been put at right back. He's sometimes plays at number 8. He has at times obviously played as a number 6, but Can has consistently continued to play in that team. And yeah, it'll be a big call from Nuri Sahin, because I don't think there's any reason why you would start Emre Can, especially when Nemcha has been playing very well. Sabitzer played well. Pascal Gross has done well. They have Julian Brandt coming back as well, I presume, who's obviously missed a game against Bayern. So I'm interested to see if he comes back into the game as well, because, I actually wrote my newsletter this week off the back of that Bayern draw on Dortmund's struggles in away games. And the crux of the issue is that Dortmund have one key playmaker in Julian Brandt, a secondary one, if you will, in Pascal Gross in terms of, the next in line in terms of key passes and assists and passes into the penalty area. But neither of them are capable of really kind of pulling the same kind of strings that they do at the Westfalenstadion. I'm actually going to quickly pull up my article because there's one stat in particular that I think is just really quite damning, actually. If you just bear with me for 1 second. Yeah, here we go. So I took a look at the number of key passes Julian Brandt. So a key pass is a pass leads to a shot. So how many passes he makes at home, which is 3.2, and pass in away from home is 1.8. Passes into the box, again, 3.12, and then passes into the box in away games drops to 0.9. So what that basically means is that for Brandt, his key passes drops by 42% from the home games to away games. His passes into the box dropped by 71%. And it's quite similar for Pascal Gross, actually. His key passes dropped by 62% and his passes into the box dropped by 39%. So basically Dortmund have these two playmakers in the middle of the park who, when they're playing at the Westfalenstadion, they're playing this big open pitch. Dortmund are flying. They've got 80,000 fans behind them. They've got the wind in the sails. They find it very easy to kind of ping the passes and make the passes. But when they go to away grounds, they really struggle. And I think there's almost like a bottleneck of, innovation or creativity because teams, like I said in my article, Julian Brandt's been playing for Dortmund for 600 years at this point, and teams obviously know that they're more or less their only playmaker. I've actually wrote numerous articles for Gegenpressing over the years saying, Brandt is the most underappreciated player at Dortmund, not because he's an amazing player, but because he's more often not the only playmaker in that team. And while some Dortmund fans might not appreciate that, opposing teams definitely do. And he's routinely singled out, he's routinely marked out of games, and against much deeper defences, he struggles, and then Dortmund struggle. I think another stat I also noted as well was the actual amount of chances he actually gets into the box. I'll just read out this brief segment from the article, which I think does really underline Brandt's struggles in away games. Unlike the vast and open pitch at the Westfalenstadion, Brandt tends to struggle to find space in these away games. This is also evident when we look at the players' touches of the ball per game, which stands at an impressive 64 touches per home game, but it falls rather drastically to 51. But when we narrow it down to touches of the ball in the final third, Brandt's game average in home games is 32 and drops down to 20. So basically, in every home game, Julian Brandt is touching the ball in the final third 12 fewer times per game than he is at home, which, if you think about that, is absolutely crazy. Can you imagine a striker touching the ball 12 fewer times in the box and then still expected to perform? So anyway, that's my rant over, and I've just gone on about Dortmund and Julian Brandt for 10 minutes.
But it's incredibly interesting because it's presumably it's the same game whether you play at home or away, right? Like the fact that these numbers drop so significantly it's unexplainable in some ways. It's not like, Dortmund they are one of the two biggest teams in German football, presumably, right? This is what we go by. I don't have the numbers in front of me, and if someone does and listens to the podcast, please reach out and tell me I'm wrong. But I assume Bayern Munich's numbers don't drop off as drastically as Dortmund's do when they go up away, right? Every other team that Dortmund play, other than Bayern Munich, they have a financial and investments advantage over that other team. Their players are simply better, and then it's every single team in the Bundesliga, including Bayer Leverkusen, RB Leipzig, and Wolfsburg, who are also the other big spenders. You and I had this discussion the other day, who spends the most money in German football, and those are the teams that spend the most money, right? And Dortmund they're behind Bayern Munich by a big margin, but then they're also ahead of everyone else by still a very big margin. So they shouldn't be maybe quite as dominant from when you go by spending, but they should be still dominant every time they play away, because they have the better personnel based on the investment that they make. And the fact that they don't is a pretty shocking stat for me, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of leads us into this kind of Gladbach game quite well, because on the one hand, we have a Gladbach team who are doing very well, or they've kind of turned their form around, and most importantly, done so off the back of some impressive home form. They've won 4 of the last 5 home games in a row. They've beaten Union Berlin, they've beaten Heidenheim, they've beaten Werder Bremen, they've beaten St. Pauli, and it's helped them kind of climb up the league table.
And they played really well against Leverkusen at home.
Yeah,
I think
of course,
that was at home. That was at home. Yeah, it was. Yeah, they played really well in that match.
Yeah. But they're coming up against a team who, and this is classic Dortmund, I think. Only Dortmund could have an extremely impressive head-to-head record against the one team who routinely beat Bayern. I feel like that's just such a Dortmund thing. We obviously talk about how Bayern, their bogey team is Gladbach. Well, Gladbach's bogey team are Dortmund. Over the course of the last 20 seasons, Gladbach have won just 9 of these ties, and Dortmund have won 27, and there's been 4 draws. So, it's an absolute one-way show, usually. However, the really interesting thing is I was reading a few match previews to this game, and a lot of them made notice of this kind of head-to-head record. For example, on Flash Score, they've said this classic perfect opportunity for Dortmund to amend their bad form, since Dortmund have won 17 of the last 20 head-to-heads. There we go. Contributing to them beating Gladbach more times than any other team with their 60 victories against them. So, foregone conclusion, Gladbach have nothing to hope for here. If you actually look at the recent history, particularly at Borussia Park, Gladbach have actually won 3 of the last 5 games against Dortmund there, and it's actually a really interesting kind of blip in what has usually been a one-way fixture. So I think if you take a look at the head-to-head over the course of all of German football history, then, Dortmund should be absolutely coasting to this one. But this is a Dortmund team who struggle on the road. It's a Dortmund team that will require Nuri Sahin to make some big decisions about bringing Emre Can and Julian Brandt back into it. And it's a Dortmund team who are up against a good Gladbach team at home, who have, in recent seasons, managed to get the monkey off their back in terms of beating Dortmund at home. So it's a really fascinating fixture for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, the Borussia Park, it feels like the atmosphere has been a lot better there this year than has been in previous years. I also think it's really fascinating how Seoane went from, he could be fired every match, now to, really having things turned around. I mean, again, a big part of that, I think, is because he's getting the most out of key players. We mentioned a lot of them. Whether it's Tim Kleindienst, Rocco Reitz, a bunch of the younger guys like Ulreich, etc. Another big name, and he's been in the news a lot this week, is Itakura, right? The centre-back that they originally acquired from Man City a few years ago, and is now in high demand because he's slowly, quietly played himself to be one of the best centre-backs in the Bundesliga, Stefan. And I think that is also, something that Seoane can be praised for, that he's getting fine. These pieces were there. A lot of these pieces have been there for some time, but he's finally getting the most out of them, right? Another one that I actually think has quietly played himself back into the spotlight is Julian, who, remember when he had this incredible start at Borussia Dortmund when he was fresh signed from 1860 and then sort of just disappeared for years. He went to Benfica, he went to Gladbach, and he just kind of turned out to be a decent Bundesliga player, but we all know that the potential was always was way more than what he's shown to us. He's slowly but surely making his way back in. So I think that speaks for Seoane, and I think we always kind of thought that there was a good coach there, that it's just, it didn't work out at Leverkusen. When I spoke to people at Leverkusen, and you spoke to people at Leverkusen, they told you very much the same thing. A lot of it has always been there was a feeling that he just couldn't control the dressing room quite the same way that maybe Xabi Alonso can, with the different nationalities there and the mixture, etc. This maybe just didn't fit his personality, but from like the craft of coaching, the tactical aspects, the way he teaches the game, Leverkusen actually really liked him. And it was some of the human aspects maybe that didn't quite fit, and that also seemed to have clashed a little bit at the start of Gladbach. They seem to have ironed this out, because you can see like he's making the players in Gladbach better. this Gladbach team isn't really changed that much from last year, but yet the football is better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a perfect example of that is Rocco Reitz at the middle of the team, is it? Or Reitz, rather.
Reitz.
Right, there we go, yeah. He had a few starts at the start of the season. I think, obviously, Gerardo Seoane kind of sees him as a kind of specialty defensive midfielder. Brought him in for the big games against Leverkusen and Frankfurt, which they lost, but he tended to drop him in the against lesser teams or teams at the bottom of the division. That's where we saw Kevin Stoger be brought in, because he obviously is a playmaker. But over the course of like the last kind of couple of months, he's just played Reitz as a starter. He's just stuck with him, and he's now played in, I think, the last 6 games. He started all of them, which is coincided with this really impressive turnaround in form, really. And actually, that Freiburg defeat last weekend was the first one that they lost with Reitz in the starting 11 during that run. So, yeah, he's definitely the heart of that team. He's definitely the heart of this kind of turnaround at Gladbach. And for anyone who's watching this game, maybe doesn't cover or follow Gladbach a lot, maybe you're a Dortmund fan, obviously, and you just kind of have to take in this match, keep an eye on him in the middle of the park. So I think he's a big player with a huge future.
No, absolutely. Already called up, I think, to the German national team as well. Julian Nagelsmann is a big fan, so yeah, you're right pointing out this guy.